My name is Maria Jennings, and I'm 32 years old. I've spent most of my life living in the shadow of my perfect husband, Ethan, and the perfect life we built together in Austin. We have a beautiful house, a stable career. I'm a lawyer, and yet none of it ever felt right to me. Ethan always seemed more interested in my success than his own, always putting on a show to impress our friends and colleagues. But that's not where the real divide lies. My older brother, Alex, the golden child of the family, has always been the one everyone looks up to. He has the looks, the charm, the career as a doctor. It's always been like I'm the one who got lost in the shuffle. I've never fit in with my family, with society, with anyone. I thought marriage would fix that, but instead it only made me feel more alone. And now, something's happened, something I never could have predicted, that will change everything. It's not just about a betrayal. It's about a truth I wasn't prepared to face. I'm not sure who I'm supposed to be anymore, but I know one thing. I will never let them win. I turned the key in the front door and stepped inside, expecting the usual emptiness. The house was quiet, eerily so. I pulled my jacket off, tossing it onto the back of the couch, and walked through the living room. The faint sound of running water echoed from the hallway. My heart stuttered. Ethan was supposed to be working. He never left the house during lunch unless something urgent came up, but I didn't think it was anything important. Jackson always said, the first step to a life well lived is knowing when you're being lied to, I murmured under my breath. My old friend's voice echoed in my head, trying to make sense of the creeping feeling in my chest. I froze in my tracks as I heard the familiar sounds of voices, hushed and intimate, coming from the master bathroom. The bathroom. My stomach lurched. Ethan, I called, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. I felt the panic start to rise. It wasn't just the lack of an answer. It was the uncharacteristic silence from Ethan. It was all too quiet. His voice, the background noise of the radio, anything gone. Something was wrong. I should have turned around and left, gone back to the office and pretended I'd never come home. But that feeling of something not being right dug deeper. I couldn't shake it. I walked up the stairs slowly, the thud of my footsteps too loud in the silence. Each step felt like it pulled me closer to a truth I wasn't ready for. When I reached the top, I moved toward the master bedroom, where the bathroom door stood ajar, the sound of the running water more pronounced now. My hand hovered over the handle, shaking slightly. My breath quickened. Should I knock? Should I just leave? I couldn't. I pushed open the door with one slow, deliberate motion. And there they were. Ethan, Charlotte, my husband, tangled in my bathtub with my best friend, their bodies intertwined, oblivious to the fact that they weren't alone. Time slowed. The sound of water running seemed to increase, as though it was drowning out the rush of blood in my ears. For a moment, I was paralyzed. My heart hammered in my chest, but I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there. They froze when they saw me. Charlotte's eyes widened. Her lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. Ethan looked at me, panic flashing across his face. "Maria," he muttered, his voice thick with regret. I couldn't bring myself to say a word. My body moved on its own, acting before I could stop it. I stepped back, closing the door quietly behind me, the click of the lock louder than anything in that moment. I turned away from the door and walked to the hallway, my mind racing, my hand clenched around the doorknob. They had no idea what was coming, but I had to make a plan. I couldn't just confront them. Not yet. The house felt different now, heavier. The walls I'd built with him, the life I'd carefully curated, were crumbling. I didn't know what the next move was, but I knew I wasn't going to let them get away with this. For the first time in years, I felt the power surge within me. I won't be the victim. Not anymore. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. As the phone rang, I stared at the lock on the bathroom door. The waiting game had begun. I took a deep breath as the voice on the other end picked up. "Hello. I need you here. Now." There's something you need to see. I hung up the phone, the sharp click of the receiver in my ear ringing louder than it should have. David was on his way. It wasn't what I had planned. Not this confrontation, not this mess, but it was the only move left. I had to see how deep this rabbit hole went. How far had they gone with their lies? Ethan and Charlotte had no idea what was coming for them. In the silence that followed, I stood in the hallway, staring at the door I'd locked just moments ago. They were still inside, probably reeling from their own realization of being caught. They didn't know me. Not like this. They thought they could take everything from me, my life, my trust, my marriage, and I would just roll over. "You don't know who you're dealing with," I whispered, feeling a cold resolve settle over me. The house felt suffocating now, heavier, as though the walls were closing in on me. I moved toward the kitchen, my fingers brushing the smooth granite of the counter. But it was all distant. I couldn't focus. I needed to think. I needed to plan. But there was a nagging thought crawling at the back of my mind. Something wasn't right. It wasn't just the affair. It couldn't be. They say the truth always comes out, but it usually takes a while. The real trick is knowing when to act. I heard my father's voice in my head, his words echoing from years ago. He'd never said them to me directly, but they'd always stuck with me. Now I understood what he meant. I paced back and forth. The walls were closing in. What next? The thought of staying in this house, knowing they'd been here, knowing what they'd done, was almost unbearable. But leaving? I wasn't sure I could leave either. Not without a fight. The floor creaked beneath me, and I stopped, every muscle in my body tightening. It wasn't a sound I'd made. Someone was upstairs. My heart skipped. My breath became shallow. The tension was too thick to ignore. I rushed to the stairs, my pulse pounding in my ears. There, in the dim light of the hallway above, I saw a shadow move. My thoughts raced, but I didn't hesitate. The adrenaline surged through me. I couldn't let David see them. Not yet. Not until I knew everything. I crept upstairs, keeping my steps light, holding my breath. The bathroom door was slightly cracked, the faintest trace of sound slipping through. Soft whispers, panicked voices. I didn't need to hear it to know what they were saying. It was a sound I never wanted to hear, but here it was. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was a calculated betrayal. One that spanned months, maybe years. A plan. A scheme. The truth of it felt like poison in my veins. This wasn't about passion. It was about power, control, and manipulation. How had I been so blind? I couldn't just confront them now. I couldn't let them talk their way out of this, not after everything. I moved to the guest room, where Ethan's work files were stacked in neat piles, untouched for months. I pulled open a drawer, my hands moving with a practiced precision. There it was, his laptop. I clicked it open. The screen lit up with the usual work dashboard, but something caught my eye, a folder titled Project X. Curiosity prickled at me, but I pushed it down. Now wasn't the time to think. I clicked the folder open, my fingers trembling. The first document that appeared wasn't a work project. It was a financial summary. Numbers. A lot of them. But what struck me were the words at the bottom of the page. Secure transfers pending. And beneath that, joint account, Maria's access revoked. Full transfer to secondary account. My blood ran cold. I scrolled down the document, heart hammering. It wasn't just money. It wasn't just some business deal. This was something bigger. Ethan had been hiding it from me. He'd been working with Charlotte, not just for an affair, but for something more. They had planned to steal from me, to leave me with nothing. My head spun. The weight of the discovery hit me all at once. This was far from just a marital betrayal. This was financial treason. This was my life being dismantled before my eyes. But there was more. The next document was even worse. A timeline, dates, names, all of them pointed back to the affair. The dates lined up. Every time I'd been away, every time I'd been at work, they were together. But the most damning piece of information was the last line. Plan for separation executed upon Maria's decision to proceed with divorce. I felt the floor shift beneath me. This wasn't just about cheating. This was orchestrated. They planned everything. Every argument we'd had, every moment he'd pulled away. It had all been calculated, crafted to break me down slowly. Ethan had already made up his mind. He didn't want me anymore. I snapped the laptop shut, my fingers trembling. The noise was deafening in the silence. A knock on the door downstairs broke my thoughts. David. I stood there, frozen, trying to control my breathing. The room spun. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. I forced my feet to move, but the heaviness in my chest made it feel like I was walking through quicksand. My mind screamed at me to act, to confront him now, but I knew better. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was bigger. As I reached the door, the faintest noise from upstairs made my skin crawl. The bathroom door. It was slightly ajar now, and I swore I saw a shadow through the crack. They were moving. I opened the door to David. His eyes were wide, filled with concern. Maria, what's? He began, but I cut him off. No more talking, I said, my voice sharp, controlled. I need your help. Now, there's something you need to see. I didn't wait for him to respond. I turned, motioning for him to follow me upstairs. This was no longer about saving a marriage. It was about survival. And I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Ethan or Charlotte, get away with what they'd done. The moment I stepped into the hallway, the air thickened, the weight of betrayal hanging in the air. The shadows were closing in, and I was right in the center of it all. I could feel it. We were being watched, and there was no way out now. The air felt thick with unease as I led David up the stairs. Every step was deliberate, my heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't just about confronting Ethan and Charlotte anymore. This was about uncovering a truth too dangerous to ignore. The weight of what I had already discovered sat heavy in my stomach, but I couldn't stop now. I had to see it through. David's eyes were wide as he followed me into the hallway, looking like he wanted to say something, but the words never came. I couldn't even focus on him. My mind was too clouded with the images from earlier. The betrayal in the bathroom, the documents on Ethan's laptop. Every part of me screamed that this was bigger than I had imagined. I reached the door to the master bedroom and paused, looking at David. They think I don't know, I said, voice low and steady. They think they can get away with this, but I'll make sure they don't. David gave a tight nod, though his gaze flickered to the door nervously. Maria, you don't have to do this. We can go to the police. They'll. No, I cut him off. I can't go to the police yet. Not without proof. David looked like he wanted to argue, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. Inside, the tension was unbearable. Ethan and Charlotte were still behind that locked door, probably trying to process what had just happened. But I knew I couldn't let them think for long. Not after everything I'd uncovered. I stepped back into the room, the silence ringing in my ears. The walls seemed to close in on me as I stood there, feeling the weight of every step I had taken leading me to this point. My life, my marriage, everything was falling apart, and I was the only one left who could fix it. I walked to the desk, where Ethan's papers were still scattered. There was something about the way everything was organized, so meticulously planned, that made my stomach churn. He'd known. He'd been planning this. Every detail, every lie, it was all part of the scheme. You said you'd stand by me, Maria, I whispered under my breath, the words a bitter echo from our wedding vows. But you were already gone. I snapped back to reality as David came up behind me. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. I could see he was trying to keep it together, but the truth was weighing on him too. Maria, we need to be careful, he said softly, voice shaking. This is dangerous. We don't know what they're capable of. I looked over at him, feeling a jolt of panic rise in my chest. I'd already thought about that, but hearing it out loud made it feel too real. They were capable of anything. Ethan, Charlotte, and even David, it seemed. The more I pieced together the story, the more I realized how deep the conspiracy went. And I couldn't let it keep going. "No, David, it's too late for careful," I said, my voice hardening. "This ends now." I moved toward the guest room where Ethan's laptop still sat. The weight of it felt heavy in my hands, a lifeline and a weapon all at once. I opened it again, eyes scanning the screen. This time, my hands were steady as I navigated the encrypted files. One by one, they opened documents, spreadsheets, secret transfers, all detailing Ethan's plan to strip me of everything. It was methodical, cold, calculated. "Ethan, you've underestimated me," I muttered, the realization hitting me with full force. He had thought he could do this without consequences, but he was wrong. I leaned in closer, scanning through the files. The timeline was even more damning than I imagined. Dates, meetings, bank accounts. The final page, though, was what stopped my heart. Final steps, complete asset transfer. Phase 2 begins. Ensure Maria remains unaware until it's too late. The words burned in my chest. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was a full-on attack on my life, my career, and my very future. This wasn't a mistake. This was war. I slammed the laptop shut, and for the first time I let myself feel the full weight of what I was up against. Betrayal hurt, but this was war, and I had no intention of losing. "Maria, we need to act fast," David said, his voice tense, his fear now matching mine. "You've got what you need. Let's go to the police before—" "Stop," I snapped. "I can't go to the police yet. Not with just this." I motioned to the laptop. "I need something bigger." David's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" I turned to face him, a grim resolve on my face. "I need them to confess. I need Charlotte to admit everything. I need proof that they've been conspiring to destroy me, and then I'll bring them down." David shifted uneasily. "How are you going to do that?" I walked to the phone, feeling the weight of what I was about to do settle deep in my bones. "I'll play along. Let them think they've won, and when they least expect it, I'll make my move. But I need time, and I need them to make a mistake." A brief silence hung in the air. It was a dangerous game I was playing, and I wasn't sure what would happen next. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let Ethan and Charlotte get away with it. Not without a fight. I dialed the number of my lawyer, Jennifer. Her voice came through the phone, steady, reassuring. "Maria, what's going on?" "I need you to help me with something," I said, my voice calm despite the storm inside me. "I'm going to need everything. We're going to turn this around." "You're sure about this?" she asked, the concern in her voice evident. I nodded, even though I knew she couldn't see me. "Yes, I'm sure." As I hung up, I felt the weight of my decision settle over me. This was no longer about saving my marriage. It was about saving myself. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The game had changed, and now I was in control. The door creaked as David stepped into the room behind me, his footsteps hesitant. The air felt heavier now, the kind of oppressive stillness that made my skin crawl. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears as I motioned for him to follow me upstairs. The light from the hallway was dim, casting long shadows against the walls, and the silence was thick enough to suffocate. I could almost feel eyes watching me, even though I knew no one was there. "You're sure this is what you want?" David asked, his voice shaky but trying to sound composed. "Yes," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. I didn't have time for second thoughts. They've made their move. It's time to make mine. I glanced at the locked bathroom door, knowing exactly what awaited behind it. But this wasn't just about confronting Ethan and Charlotte anymore. This was about survival, about reclaiming the life they'd tried to strip from me. I wasn't just going to let them destroy everything. Not without a fight. David was still behind me, his unease palpable, but I couldn't afford to comfort him. I was already too far gone. I stepped into the master bedroom, the place that once felt like a sanctuary. It was suffocating now, filled with memories of a life that no longer belonged to me. The sheets still smelled faintly of perfume. Their perfume. I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts aside. There was no time for distractions. "Help me get the rest of Ethan's files," I said, barely looking at David. I wasn't asking. I didn't have to. His hesitation was brief before he crossed the room and began pulling drawers open. He was trying to act like everything was normal, but I saw through it. We were both in the same sinking ship now. His guilt was suffocating, and I couldn't blame him. He didn't know what I knew. He didn't understand the depth of this betrayal. As he fumbled with the papers, I walked over to the desk where I'd left Ethan's laptop. My fingers hovered over the keys, knowing what I'd find: more lies, more deceit. But it still hit me like a punch to the stomach. Every document, every email, confirmed the truth I already feared. "Maria, this is madness," David said, breaking the silence. "You're playing with fire. They'll come for you." I paused, looking at him over my shoulder. "They're already coming for me, David. I can't just sit back and wait for them to finish what they started." He opened his mouth to argue, but I wasn't listening. The laptop was my key, the proof I needed to bring them down. I clicked through the files quickly, my eyes scanning the data. Every document revealed more and more. Hidden accounts, secret transfers. The entire thing was a meticulous plan, everything calculated down to the last detail. But what caught my attention was one file at the bottom of the list. The title, "Final Step, Full Asset Transfer." I clicked on it, my heart sinking as the numbers appeared on the screen. The final amount, the transfer date, everything lined up perfectly, and I felt my throat tighten. "I knew it," I whispered, mostly to myself. Ethan wasn't just having an affair. He was planning to take everything from me. The house, the bank accounts. He had already transferred most of our assets into another account, hidden from me, from everyone. He and Charlotte were not just lovers, they were partners in crime. "Maria," David's voice was trembling now. "What are you going to do with all this?" The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. The files were damning, but they weren't enough. I needed more. I needed them to confess. I needed them to make the first move. "I'll make them think they've won," I said, turning the laptop off with a click. "I'll play along, and when they think I'm broken, I'll bring them down." David stared at me in disbelief. "You're really going to do this? After everything?" I met his eyes. "I'm already too deep. There's no going back." The sudden sound of footsteps from downstairs froze me in place. My heart skipped a beat. Ethan was moving, or maybe Charlotte. I couldn't tell, but there was no more time for planning. It was time to act. "Go to the guest room," I told David, my voice sharp. "Keep quiet. Don't let them know you're here." David's eyes flickered with confusion, but he nodded and backed away, disappearing behind the door. I walked to the top of the stairs and listened, straining for any sound. The silence below felt like a warning. A trap. Something was coming. Something I hadn't expected. My mind raced. This wasn't just about a betrayal anymore. It was a full-on attack. Ethan and Charlotte had planned everything, right down to their exit strategy. They'd even gone so far as to lock me out of the family fortune. But they didn't know me. Not like this. I made my way downstairs, each step slower than the last, feeling the weight of every decision I'd made. The betrayal, the lies, it all led to this moment. And now I was ready. I was done being the victim. I reached the bottom of the stairs, and then I saw it. The front door was open just a crack. My pulse raced. Someone had been here. Someone was still here. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I stepped cautiously toward the door, peering through the crack. Nothing. But the chill in the air told me everything. The game was no longer in my hands. Someone had taken control, and I was being watched. I pulled the door open fully, stepping out into the dark night. The world around me seemed to hold its breath. I'm not the only one with secrets, I whispered into the empty night. I stood frozen, staring at the front door. The shadows outside stretched long across the porch, and my pulse thundered in my ears. I felt eyes on me, though the street was empty. The cool night air brushed my skin, but it felt suffocating. I hadn't realized just how much I'd been holding my breath until the sound of the door, clicking behind me, broke the tension. David was still behind me, waiting for me to make the next move, but I wasn't sure what to do next. The walls were closing in, and the weight of the evidence was more than I could bear. I told you this was going too far, David said, his voice low, almost desperate. Maria, you don't know what you're up against. You're playing with fire. I turned sharply to face him. Fire? You think I'm scared of fire? I didn't know why I was getting defensive. Maybe it was the panic creeping in, or maybe I just didn't want to hear it anymore. I've been living in a house full of lies for years, and now they've made their move. David looked at me, his eyes full of regret. But it wasn't his regret I was worried about anymore. The game had shifted. My thoughts raced as I walked back toward the living room, my mind trying to process what I just uncovered. Every document, every transfer, every secret bank account was a blow to my chest. But there was more. There had to be more. I moved quickly to the kitchen, pulling open the drawer where I kept the spare keys. There was something I had to do, something that could change everything. You need to stop, David said, his voice more urgent now. You're making a mistake. We need to go to the authorities. This isn't just some affair. This is... Shut up. The words slipped out before I could stop them. I'm not going to the police, David. Not yet. Not until I'm sure they're guilty. I need them to confess. I need to see them squirm. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel my blood rushing through my veins, the heat of anger and fear mixing into something that was almost too much to bear. But I couldn't stop now. Not when I was this close. Not when I had everything in my hands. I turned to face him, feeling the shift in the air. You don't get it. They've been planning this for months, maybe even longer. I'm not going to just hand them over to the authorities. I'm going to make sure they regret ever crossing me. David's eyes widened. What are you talking about? I didn't answer. Instead, I moved past him and pulled the keys from the drawer, walking toward the door. I had to get to the bank. I had to see the accounts myself. It was the only way to be sure. The weight of the keys felt heavy in my hand, the cold metal a reminder that everything was about to change. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, the street lights felt like they were watching me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The path ahead was dark, but I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The truth was the only thing that mattered now. I was halfway to the bank when the first text came through. It was from an unknown number. Stop digging, or we'll make sure you never see that evidence again. My stomach twisted. I stared at the screen, fingers trembling. They were watching me. They knew what I was doing, but they didn't know what I had already uncovered. I clenched my jaw. It's too late for threats now. The streets blurred as I sped up. My phone buzzed again, another message. This time from David. Maria, please. They're not the only ones with power here. I paused, the words sinking in. I wasn't sure what David meant, but I wasn't ready to listen to him. Not now. The city was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that makes you think someone is lurking just out of sight. I could feel it, the watchful presence, the knowing eyes, the sensation that something was coming for me. I wasn't alone in this, but I was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about Ethan and Charlotte anymore. There were others involved. I just didn't know who. I arrived at the bank just after closing hours. The lights were dimmed and the atmosphere felt off, but I was already too deep into this to turn back. I made my way to the side entrance, the one I knew would give me access to the vaults. My hands were shaking as I inserted the key into the lock. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the cold air of the vaults. The room was dark except for the faint glow of security lights. I knew where to go, but the silence of the place was unnerving. The hum of the ventilation system seemed louder now. I moved quickly, pulling open the drawer where the most important documents were stored. Ethan's personal files, the ones he'd hidden from me. My breath caught in my throat as I rifled through the papers, each one confirming what I already knew. Ethan had been manipulating me from the start. But this was something more. At the bottom of the drawer was a small envelope, carefully sealed. My heart skipped when I saw the name on the front. Charlotte. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were several documents, each one more damning than the last. A contract, a signed agreement. The final step, it read. Ensure Maria is completely excluded. Proceed with the transfer of all assets. I felt my blood run cold. They hadn't just planned to ruin me emotionally, they were preparing to bankrupt me, to take everything. And Charlotte had been the mastermind. But there was something else in the envelope. A final page. Ensure no evidence is left behind. Protect all assets and personal information. Make sure Maria has no claim to anything. I slammed the drawer shut. It wasn't just the betrayal of an affair. It was an outright conspiracy to destroy me. And I was the last one to know. I turned quickly, my mind racing. I had what I needed. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I couldn't let them get away with it. But as I turned toward the door, I saw someone standing in the hallway, a figure in the shadows. I froze. It wasn't just Ethan or Charlotte. It was someone else. Someone who had been watching me the entire time. Maria, the voice said, and my heart stopped. David, I asked, but the voice that answered wasn't his. It was someone I never expected. The moment I stepped into the shadowed room, the weight of everything crashed into me. It wasn't just the discovery of betrayal or the destruction of everything I had worked for. No, it was the moment I realized I was no longer the person I once was. The woman who had blindly trusted her husband. The wife who thought love was enough. I wasn't that woman anymore. I was something else now. Something stronger. The game had changed, and I had become its architect. David was still there, but the tension in the room had shifted. He wasn't just a confidant anymore, he was part of the plan. The man who had once been an ally had now become a witness to the destruction I was about to unleash. There was no going back. And for the first time in years, that thought didn't terrify me. Maria, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Are you sure about this? Once we do this, there's no undoing it. I didn't answer him. What was there to say? I had already made my decision. My mind was made up the moment I found that envelope. I've already lost everything, I said, my voice steady. And I'm not about to let them take any more. The feeling of control surged through me. The confusion, the anger, the pain, everything I had felt in the past days now transformed into a singular, burning resolve. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about Ethan or Charlotte. It was about me reclaiming what I had lost. I turned away from David, pacing slowly in front of the window. The city lights outside flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the room. There was a certain beauty in the chaos. Something dark, something real. Like a storm just before the first drop of rain. It was the calm before the storm. Are you ready? I asked, not looking at him, but feeling his presence behind me. David didn't answer right away, but I could hear his breath catch. He understood what I was about to do. He'd seen the evidence. He knew what was at stake. And yet there was no turning back. The moment I stepped into the game, I had chosen my side. And there would be no second chances. We didn't need to say anything more. I moved swiftly toward the door, but as I reached for the handle, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway outside made my heart skip. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. They were here. David, get to the back door, I said quietly, urgency creeping into my voice. Now David hesitated for only a second before he nodded and disappeared toward the back of the house. I stayed rooted in place, watching the front door through the glass of the window. My hands were trembling, but I fought to steady them. I won't be weak anymore. I won't let them control me. As the sound of footsteps echoed outside, I heard the familiar click of a car door. It was Ethan and Charlotte. They had no idea I was ready for them. But I was. I had everything I needed. The files, the evidence, the proof. All they had was each other, and that wasn't going to be enough anymore. A soft knock on the door snapped me out of my thoughts. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, and then the doorbell rang. I didn't move. Not yet. Ethan's voice, calm but forced, came from the other side. "Maria, we need to talk." I felt a twisted satisfaction at the sound of his voice. I had waited for this moment, and now it was finally here. Slowly, I walked toward the door and opened it. There they stood, Ethan, looking disheveled but composed, and Charlotte, standing beside him like a shadow, eyes darting nervously. They thought I would crumble. They thought I would fall apart when I saw them. But instead I stood tall, calm, in control. "Maria," Ethan began again, his voice softer this time. "Please, we need to talk. This has gone too far." I stepped aside, motioning for them to enter. "Come in," I said, my voice laced with the coldness I felt. "We have a lot to discuss." They hesitated at first, unsure of how to proceed. But they didn't know me anymore, not the way they once did. Ethan and Charlotte stepped inside, their eyes flicking to the living room where the weight of the files on the table waited. It was the moment of truth. "I think you both know why you're here," I said, my words sharp and deliberate. "And I think you both know that you've lost." Their faces tightened in confusion, but I saw the flicker of realization in their eyes. They hadn't expected me to be ready. They hadn't expected me to fight back. "You thought you could take everything from me," I continued, walking toward the table and letting my fingers hover over the files. "My trust, my future, my life. But what you didn't understand, Ethan, Charlotte, is that I've already lost everything. And that means I have nothing left to lose." I threw the first file onto the table. The sound of it hitting the wood felt deafening in the room. "You've been playing me," I said, my voice colder now. "You've been planning this for months, maybe even years. But here's the thing. I'm not the fool you think I am." I slammed the second file down. The weight of the truth was suffocating. But it wasn't just about what they had done to me. It was about what I had learned about myself in the process. I wasn't the victim. Not anymore. Ethan's face went pale as he looked at the files, his hand reaching toward them. But he stopped short when he saw the final document, the final piece of the puzzle, a confession, the truth that would destroy everything. "You think this is over?" I asked, my eyes locked on his. "No, this is just the beginning." As their world began to crumble around them, I finally understood the one thing that had been missing all along. Control wasn't about what you had. It was about what you were willing to lose. And I wasn't afraid of losing anymore.